welcome everyone to the first of what we hope will be a series of training and technical assistance geared at helping the affordable housing community to access the federal investments for improvement in efficiency, reducing energy costs, and decarbonizing affordable multifamily housing across the state. So I want to mention at the very top that the Housing Alliance put together a survey to get a better idea of training and technical assistance needs for housing providers and interest in engaging in these programs. If you haven't already, please complete that survey. It won't take you very long, but it will help us an awful lot to put together more training and technical assistance moving forward to make sure that everybody can access these programs. I also want to start out by thanking our partners who've come together for this event, our hosts at Housing Alliance, as well as co-presenters with New Ecology and Action Housing, colleagues from Regional Housing Legal Services, Energy Foundation, Hillman Foundation, Heinz Foundation. There's an awful lot of folks that are very interested in making sure that the affordable housing community is first in line for a lot of these programs. And of course, our very special guests, and I'm hopeful that we'll have Brian Regley join us soon, for the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Critical Investments, as well as Keith Welks, consultant for the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. Really happy to have those special guests with us so we can hear right from the folks who are in charge of how and where this money comes. So my name is Elizabeth Marks. I'm the director of the Utility Law Project, and we're a statewide legal services program within Regional Housing Legal Services. And our mission is to make sure that low-income families across Pennsylvania can access safe and affordable utility service. So we work really closely with the housing providers because our missions are intertwined with all of yours. So I'll be your guide through today's event. I do encourage you to ask questions so you don't forget as you go. We may answer them if there's time, but we will have breakouts. So breakout sessions at the end, and they'll be self-selected. So we have some folks there to guide and answer your questions on different categories. So stick with us for that. But we have a huge slate of speakers over the next hour and a half, so we're going to get to it. Just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about. We're going to start, hopefully, and I think I just got a message from Brian.
I'm here. Hello.
Oh, wonderful! Wonderful. So we'll hear from Brian in just a moment. We'll walk through why decarbonization for affordable housing. We'll talk about a couple of the key programs for affordable housing providers, noting that these programs are still being built. So there is an opportunity for housing providers to say what they need most, right? So we can build these programs to serve you all. We'll then hear from Keith Welks about homes, which is a particular program that we're hoping will really help move the needle on multifamily efficiency. We'll hear from Sarah Rollich then about the how, right? How affordable housing providers can be most prepared to take advantage of these historic investments. And finally, we'll do some self-selected breakouts. So without further ado, I'm gonna pass it over to Dr. Brian Regley, who's the executive director and kind of marshaling this historic investment in energy and communities with the Office of Critical Investments for Governor Josh Shapiro. So Dr. Brian, thanks so much for being here, and I'll pass it to you for our opening remarks. Oh, you're on mute, Dr. Regley.
There we go.
There we go.
Look, Elizabeth, there's a lot of people out there who probably after they hear me talk will want me to have gone back on mute, but it is what it is. You're stuck with me for the next few minutes. Thanks for your time today, everybody. My name is Brian Regley, and my goal is to maximize the value of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for the governor. I've had the privilege of working with him in various capacities over the last 20 to 25 years, and as a leader, he brings to the table, I think, a tremendous capacity to understand the complexity of the challenges that we face in the infrastructure space. So I want to begin by telling you a bit of a story about how I explained the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits to him when we first started discussing it a year ago. And I want to talk about how it applies to housing authorities and to not-for-profits and to governmental agencies, because I think that's an important place to start our conversation. And folks like Keith and others will carry it forward. But the story I'd like to tell them is this, is like, look, if you had the legislature appropriate $10 billion to build a nuclear power plant, a Commonwealth of Pennsylvania owned and operated nuclear power plant. I'm not suggesting we should, but let's say we did. And we put it in Indiana County in Pennsylvania. Here's what would happen. As part of the Inflation Reduction Act, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania would receive back from the U.S. Department of Treasury, assuming we use prevailing wage, which certainly we would, $3 billion from that $10 billion investment. That's the investment tax credit component of the Inflation Reduction Act. That's the base of this Section 48 energy property. If we were to use domestically manufactured materials, and certainly there are companies like Mitsubishi and others who are here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania who are building these kinds of turbines and all these components, you would get another 10%. You would get a $4 billion check back from the U.S. Department of Treasury. Because that is an energy community defined in the Inflation Reduction Act and further articulated by the U.S. Department of Energy as communities that have been affected by coal and the transition of coal and energy and employment in those spaces, you would get another $1 billion back from the U.S. Department of Treasury. And interestingly enough, although this is a capped tax credits, the others are uncapped, the capped tax credit. If you were to build an affordable housing project adjacent to the nuclear power plant, I mean, maybe people don't want to live there, but just use that as an example for a second. Theoretically, an additional 20% of the value of that could apply for the tax credit, $7 billion back from the U.S. Department of Treasury for building a $10 billion nuclear power plant. Now, I do not suggest that all the housing authorities on the call build nuclear power plants. It's probably not something that you really want to necessarily do with your local housing investment dollars, but it applies to solar arrays. It applies to geothermal heat pumps. It applies to all kinds of technologies that could be integrated into the development concepts that every single housing authority has in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Either because you're doing, a 4% and you're renovating, even if you're doing a 9%, the investors can qualify. But you might say to me, Brian, what is this thing that you're telling me that the Pennsylvania government receives tax credit? We don't pay taxes. No, you don't pay taxes. We don't pay taxes as a state. You don't pay taxes as, a housing authority. Yet, because of the direct pay provisions in the U.S., Treasury regulations that have recently come out, all of that embodied in the Inflation Reduction Act allows you and your leadership to qualify for those tax credits, assuming that you are the ones who made the investment. So concretely, if there is a community house that sits in the center of a development and the housing authority has an easement to it or owns that building, even though the tax credit entity controls the rest of it, if it's your solar array and it's offsetting the cost of your operation in your particular building as part of that development, then the housing authority gets the tax credit. It's 30, 40, 50% of the value of it. It's a check delivered directly back to you. And ultimately, anytime you start thinking about new development or renovating existing development, the extent to which you can braid together these tax credits from the perspective of your sources and uses, there's a lot of things that might not have penciled out that suddenly look very, very different. And from the perspective of underwriting, when you're trying to demonstrate the accretive cash value of each of these individual investments, surely if you lower the utility bills of the individuals that are living in these sites because you built a solar array proximate to that, and now all of a sudden there's an offset, because the solar array is basically paying for a portion of the community's energy consumption. And depending on how you're managing your utility allocations within the context of the investments that you're making, you can imagine all sorts of ways in which these tax credits could change and shape how your development moves forward. We at the Budget Office at the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania are standing up a team of people to assist and help you understand the value of these tax credits. We're already talking to many of the housing authorities in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania about how these rules apply to their particular investment strategies. And the good news is this: these tax credits are available under statute through 2032. So it's not like you have to do something tomorrow, but you do have to start planning today and tomorrow, because you guys know anytime you try to do a renovation, put things on the table, try to create new investments, new values, it's going to take time. So if you're not looking at your capital investment plan over the next 3, 4, 5 years relative to these kinds of energy investments, you lose a huge opportunity to maximize the value of the Inflation Reduction Act. Ultimately, that's the job the governor gave me. So that's why I'm here talking to you today, to give you a little bit of context, right? And why am I starting with tax credits? And many of you, of course, deal with the types of tax credits that are involved in affordable housing. And you understand something having to do with tax credits. And that's probably a good thing to sort of start as a context. Even though, again, I would emphasize these are different types of tax credits. These are direct payments. This is a different incentive regime than what you've usually dealt with. The reality is this: when the Congressional Budget Office scored the Inflation Reduction Act and its cost to America's taxpayers, 1/3 of it is appropriations, but 2/3 of it are tax cuts. And those tax cuts, these tax investments are transformative at the scale of literally trillions of dollars when taken in aggregate. The initial investment of the CBO and then increased over time is that $600 billion of tax credits should be issued nationwide as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. If you reverse engineer it, that means that $4 to $5 trillion with a T of investments in new critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure would be happening in order to obtain those tax credits. Now, they may be a $10,000 solar array on a community center. They may be $1 million solar array or a geothermal system that provides district heat for a housing community, or it may be a utility-grade solar project down the street, or it may be a nuclear power plant in the middle of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You can imagine this huge structure that's associated with all of these various investments. So folks like Keith will talk about, and correctly so, the opportunity to take some of the direct appropriations, because those are important as well, and how we work with PHFA and how we work with each of you individually to unlock the capabilities of those programs and the weatherization programs and all of the additional programs that are coming through the utilities so that we can reach into the low-income communities and improve housing stock. All of that is really important because all of it adds to basis. And for those of you who deal with tax every day, and I'm sure some of you on this call do, everything that adds to basis improves the financeability of the thing, but it also creates more value from the perspective of the tax credits. So for me, it all comes back to the same thing. If you're looking at your sources and uses and you built your spreadsheet in 2018 and there's kind of a way in which you do things, it's time to update that model. The things that I've told you about, we're happy to help you with. The things that you're going to hear about during the course of the day will further amplify those capabilities. But I invite all of you to think through what these opportunities may look like, to communicate with us about how we can work together on these issues. And that's really the thing I wanted to start with and the thing I wanted to say. So Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you wanted to have me extend those conversations further, open myself up for questions, whatever that may happen to be that you think is most useful or useful to the team. But I want to make sure that everybody on this call is aware of how these tax credits work, that the direct payments are available to every single authority and every single not-for-profit and every single community organization that is on this call today. And our job is to help you make sure you understand them and get them.
Thanks, Dr. Egley. And I think, if folks have any questions, we probably have time for one question before we move on. We are in a meeting format, so if somebody wants to raise their hand, we could ask a question now of Dr. Regley before we move into some more content, get into the details here. There may be a lot of shy folks. So.
That's all right. And hearing none, beregley@pa.gov, right? Very easy. If anything that I've said doesn't make sense today, drop me a note, set up a call. If there's another person, if you're looking at, if you're not a CFO and you want your CFO to hear this, drop me an email, put me on a call. This is what I do all day. It's a privilege and it's a pleasure. It's the best job I'm ever going to have. There are billions of dollars available to accelerate housing projects in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I want to make sure you all understand it and use every dollar of it you can. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thanks, Dr. Regley. And we do have one
Oh,
question. Jeremy, I didn't talk about this with my co-conveners, but let's get one question in before we move into the deep into the content.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for your role in trying to make the Inflation Reduction Act accessible for communities. It's not easy because there's so much to it.
Yeah.
The direct pay is an incredible innovation by the IRS to make the renewable energy tax credit available to nonprofits that focus on serving low and moderate income communities. The Inflation Reduction Act home energy efficiency rebate and the home electrification and appliance rebate, and I would add the 25C home energy efficiency tax credit, can all serve low and moderate income homeowners who are engaged in a basic systems home repair and an energy retrofit. My understanding is Department of Energy wants 40% of the $8.4 billion to go to low and moderate income homeowners. Do you see a pathway to convert those incentives from rebates and tax credits to a direct grant via a state and or a county in partnership with community program managers?
So it's a great question. Many of these rebates do show up in the form of grants, and we're in the process of designing how some of these grant programs, or what we'll sort of call incentive programs, roll out. So you'll hear a little bit more about that in a few moments. But one of the things that I think is the key challenge in all of this is quite often the rebate itself is not sufficient, even in the form of a grant or a proportion, to pay for the thing that needs to be paid for in a world where decarbonization is one of the key priorities. And to your point, we're trying to direct these funds into low income communities. And we hope it'll be much more than 40% ultimately, because that's part of our mandate as well. But in each of these communities, as you know, even in the housing stock that's maintained or managed or financed by housing authorities, to put a heat pump in place, you probably also have to replace the breakers. And then to replace the breakers, you probably also have to upgrade the connection to the grid. And you can imagine all these various components. So one of the biggest challenges that we're going to collectively face is the gap financing that's going to be required to do the thing that needs to be done. The governor has leaned into the whole home repair program, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, and that pertains to single family homes and small unit configurations up to 5. So there are some additional grant funds that are running through the system, but that program is so oversubscribed right now because of such a great need. And I'm sure that oversubscription is the same oversubscription that every one of our energy development companies, our energy distribution companies, our EDCs have with regard to the energy efficiency programs that they are mandated by our Public Utility Commission to run. So one of the biggest opportunities here, Jeremy, as I see it, is, to your point, there are a couple of programs that we're going to talk about today. There is a broad array of additional programs that need to be brought to bear, but yet at the same time, there's still going to be incremental financing requirements. So how do we at the state level, working through PHFA or PEDFA and DCED, work with the local communities so that they can begin to enable the work that we need to do to deliver these incentives into, to your point, county organizations or local EDCs that have specific development projects that they have in mind or rehabilitation projects in mind? I wish I had an answer to how all that's supposed to work, Jeremy, but I can tell you that that's what our team is working on. And elements of this you're going to hear about today, and elements of this you're going to hear about in the coming months.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Regley. Thanks for your question, Jeremy. We have a lot of content to get to. We're going to talk about answering some of those questions. Can't thank you enough, Dr. Regley, for joining us today. I'm going to move us along a little bit about defining the why. The biggest thing is energy costs. I'm going to move through these slides pretty quickly because a lot of you are here because the energy and water prices have been outpacing inflation over the last few years very rapidly, and there is no sign of that stopping. In fact, if anything, costs are going to continue on the trajectory that they're on, which is very high, with some of the highest cost increases in propane, in heating oil, where the decarbonization comes in. We've got low-income families, roughly 1.4 million, paying between 7 and 30% of their income on energy costs. We need to bring that down. It leaves very little for folks to keep up with ever increasing rents. And we've got a huge utility insecurity problem in Pennsylvania. We had 330 families lose service last year. We had an increase of 40% of gas terminations year over year. Last winter, we had 20,000 Pennsylvania households enter heat without winter, with 14,000 remaining without heat as of February. Big problem here, right? We also have some of the oldest housing stock in the nation. We are fourth oldest in terms of housing stock, with Pittsburgh and Philadelphia both making the top 10 list. We've got Scranton, Wilkes-Barre on number 1 for mid-sized metro areas with the oldest housing stock. We've got, I don't need to tell you all, we've got old housing here. We also have some racial disparities we need to deal with, and these programs through the IRA will help us do some of that. But Black and Latino families and Indigenous households have significantly higher energy burdens compared to white households. And we have a problem where folks are reducing what they're paying for food, medicine, in order to keep up with energy costs. Because we all know failure to keep up with your energy costs can result in long-term housing instability, which adds cost to housing providers for evictions. It adds cost to communities to deal with unhoused folks. And again, there's racial disparities in terms of households that are living at an unhealthy temperature, both based on income and based on race. So these are problems we got to grapple with. These are consequences that many of you well know, right? If we don't deal with utility insecurity, we are shifting more costs to residents. We are creating unstable housing environments, and the IRA is going to give us some ways to deal with it. So, seemingly intractable. I always give the doom and gloom for those of you who have seen us speak before, because we're seeing this every day. But I'm going to pass it to my colleague Joshua Galloway from New Ecology to explain how deep carbonization and building efficiency can help reduce some of these consequences. So, Joshua, take it away.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everybody. Joshua Galloway with New Ecology. We are a 25-year-old nonprofit focused on bringing the benefits of sustainability to underserved communities, and are very excited to speak with you today. Next, please. So this is a simple question, right? You just take out your furnace and you install a heat pump and you're done, right? Next slide. The answer is no. The reason is, when you take out a furnace and you replace a heat pump, you're ignoring all of the other parts of the building and how the building works and how the residents experience that home. And so we really want to emphasize that if you're going to electrify and decarbonize, you really need to work on making the building more energy efficient and comfortable as part of the electrification process. And that's what we're going to speak briefly about today. Next, please. Electrification is in many ways as simple as this, of just replacing systems that use fossil fuels. This is an example of a community in Delaware we worked on, that we replaced furnaces with heat pumps as part of a electrification process, improved windows, insulation, air sealing within the buildings, and so increased the resident comfort and efficiency as part of that electrification process. We did not replace the gas water heaters as part of that process because there wasn't enough capacity within the electric panels. And so electrification is not an all or nothing experience that's set up for the next time systems are replaced to increase electric capacity. And so there's every community, it's going to be a little different about how the approach fits in. Next, please. We've been doing this work with the National Housing Trust, and I say this work, and it's Inflation Reduction Act endeavors, including a boot camp that we're doing with the National Housing Trust and others. And what we've learned during this process and working with CDCs around the country is that it's important to think about all the pieces. And so number one, when you are going after an electrification or a decarbonization scope, is to reduce your load, reduce the amount of energy needed to heat and cool the buildings. Number two, think about resident comfort. Definitely have to make sure that resident comfort, energy efficiency are parts of the puzzle. Indoor air quality is also important. That's one of the main reasons to remove combustion appliances from a building, is to improve indoor air quality. Also have to think about ventilation. And then systems replacement, that's the easier piece in some ways, followed by renewables. And so when we think about electrification and decarbonization, we're reducing energy required to run the buildings. We're taking into account resident comfort, indoor air quality, system replacement, and renewables. And each property will approach this in a slightly different way, but we have to keep these principles in mind each time we go after this effort. Next, please. Load reduction is important enough that I'm going to talk about it again. And the idea is that when you make your lighting more efficient and appliances more efficient, reduce the amount of hot water that the buildings use, improve the air sealing to reduce drafts, and add insulation to improve thermal comfort, you're freeing up electrical capacity in the building and reducing utility costs. And so these are all kind of common sense measures to do as part of electrification. And the great news is the Inflation Reduction Act has funds to help cover the cost for doing these measures. Next, please. Resident comfort is important, and my colleague Rebecca found this excellent slide to share how we think about comfort. We want buildings to be energy efficient, but not at the cost of resident comfort. And so if a resident is not comfortable, then our work has not been successful. This, of course, depends on different properties, different populations, and whereas seniors in a building might require a higher temperature, families might require a different temperature. We think about all these things as we talk about replacing systems and improving building envelopes. And the goal here is to find the best solution for each property. So it's not a matter of one size fits all, and it's a matter of working with your team, including property management and property maintenance, to define what are the best systems to replace in the buildings, knowing that they will be the ones taking care of the buildings. Next, please. Indoor air quality is one of these nebulous things that it's not something you can see or hold, but it's something that affects us every day. And so the image on the left, controlling the source, the downspout from the gutters dumps right at the corner of the building. And the result is inside the crawl space has mildew. And so indoor air quality is very poor in that space because of something that's happening outside the building. And so taking care of the outside of the building, making sure the ground slips away and drainage is taken away from the building is a priority. Ventilation, the middle image shows an energy recovery ventilator that brings in outdoor air, conditions it, distributes it throughout the building where residents are. And so you get good ventilation. And then the last piece, removing combustion. And so a colleague of mine just replaced their gas range with an electric range and was able to actually test the air when they were cooking and found a great reduction in volatile organic compounds and uncombusted natural gas. And so the point with all of this is we need to think about how all of the actions that we're doing affect the end result, which is providing good indoor air quality for residents. Next. Resilience is one of the most recent additions to the kind of language of sustainability. And when you break it down, it's really the ability to adapt to change. We see resiliency hubs, which are community rooms that can be supplied with backup power, refrigerator, charging outlets, basically a place where residents can come and charge their phones, store their medicine. Another piece in resilience is emergency preparedness plan and training. And so this is not a physical thing, but something that is developed and communicated with residents and staff. And then the more obvious pieces of flood protection and cooling centers also help address the issues that we see in the Mid-Atlantic specifically as flooding and extreme heat. And I believe that is the end of my piece. Thank you, Liz.
My mute button. There we go. Well, thanks, Joshua. We're next. You're gonna hear from Pat Coleman, also from New Ecology, who's gonna give us an overview of some of those programs Dr. Regley mentioned from the Inflation Reduction Act that can be paired with, braided with, stacked with the other kinds of financial incentives, tax credits. Most of these programs, I want to note, are still in the design phase. And so one of the chief goals coming out of this webinar is to engage with many of you to make sure that Dr. Regley and the other agencies that are administering these programs are going to build out the programs in a way that best serve the affordable housing community. So take it away, Pat, and we'll go through this overview.
Thank you, Liz. And thanks everyone for joining us here today. So, after spending the last couple minutes talking about the why and a high-level description of the how, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about some of the resources that are coming through the Inflation Reduction Act. So just to set the context here, what is the Inflation Reduction Act? We're talking about a federal law that was passed in August of 2022, which is by far the single largest federal investment in clean energy and climate change. Of particular note for us here today is a lot of the resources, a lot of the programs that are authorized by the Inflation Reduction Act are targeted to serve low income. The language in the statute is disadvantaged. We're talking underinvested, low-income communities. So it's a salient theme throughout all the programs that I'm going to talk about here. And let's dive right in. So next slide, please. Okay. So this is a list of the programs that I wanted to highlight for this event. There are programs and initiatives that are coming through a number of different federal agencies. So I'm going to talk about initiatives where the funding is coming through the EPA, HUD, the Department of Energy, the Department of Treasury. So it is complicated. There are lots of places to look for funding. My goal here is to provide a summary of, as I said, kind of the funding and initiatives that are most relevant to housing and community development. The way I think about this is, there's a particular set of programs that are a little bit more oriented towards projects, by which I mean properties. If you own, manage, or develop affordable multifamily housing, kind of what resources you might be able to use for that particular project. And there are other resources that are a little bit more programmatic in nature. And there's some overlap here. So let's get started. Next slide, please, Liz. So first up is the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program. This is a program that is coming from HUD. It is designed to serve privately owned and HUD-assisted properties. There's a significant amount of funding, both in the form of grants and loans, that are available for the items defined on the slide here: energy efficiency, indoor air quality, et cetera, a number of the things that Joshua just talked about. There's three pathways, or kind of three tiers of the GRIP program that provides varying levels of funding depending upon the scope of your project, how impactful it's going to be. As Liz said, many of the IRA programs are still emergent. This is actually one where there have been several rounds of funding already. And on HUD's website, they're advertising there's one more round of funding available for each of these programs, with the applications due in the coming months. So if you haven't looked at this yet, it sounds appealing. Please do dig in soon. Next slide, please, Liz. Next up is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or GGRF. This is a massive $27 billion initiative that is coming through the EPA. Again, it's coming through three tranches. I'm going to talk about each of them: Solar for All, the National Clean Investment Fund, and the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. Overall, these are resources to try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants, deliver benefits to underserved communities, and mobilize financing. So next slide, please. First up is Solar for All. This is a program that is trying to advance residential solar access in low-income communities. There's $7 billion available here for approximately 60 awards. Applications went in last fall, and awards are expected sometime this spring. There are at least two applications that I'm aware of that went in from Pennsylvania, one from the state's Energy Development Authority, and then another one, the Heartland Solar Coalition, where the Pittsburgh region is in partnership with other kind of traditional Rust Belt regions of the country. So more to come on this, but the intent is to provide resources to serve the entire state. Next slide, please. So the NCIF and CCIA, these are awards that were just announced a week ago today. So $14 billion went out for the National Clean Investment Fund. That is intended to provide affordable financing for clean technology, clean energy projects. 40% of the funding, again, is supposed to go to low-income and underserved communities. The Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, there's $6 billion there. That is designed to kind of provide funding and technical assistance to enhance the capacity of low-income community lenders. So big focus on CDFIs there. I expect there's a number of entities that are listed here that are familiar. There's also some organizations like Climate United and Power Forward Communities, where it's just kind of a single purpose entity coalition that was created for the purposes of the GGRF. But there's some known entities behind that. So, Climate United, behind that is Community Preservation Corp. And Calvert. Power Forward Communities includes, known leaders, LISC, Enterprise, and Habitat. So a lot more to come on that. The awards just came out, and the programs will actually kind of get stood up and start to be rolled out later this year. Next slide, please. Okay, the home energy programs. I'm going to keep this pretty high level because we've got more time after me, where Keith is going to talk about what's happening in Pennsylvania. But the IRA authorized two rebate programs. There's the HOMES program and the HERE program. This funding is coming from the Department of Energy. Nationally, we're talking about nearly $9 billion. There was a formula to determine how much money is allocated in different regions. So Pennsylvania in total is getting about $260 million. The IRA sets the basic framework for how these rebate programs are to operate. And then the state is responsible for creating a program design and an implementation plan as to how that program is going to take shape in the particular state. Next up. So the HOMES program, again, Keith is going to get into this in much more detail, but I just wanted to flag, this is a rebate program designed to improve efficiency in existing buildings. And there's some real money on the table here, right? We're talking about rebates up to $4,000 to $8,000, depending upon how deep you can go in terms of the energy improvements. Next slide, please. And then there is the electrification rebates. So this is intended to support, enable the purchase, the installation of all electric appliances, systems, and buildings. The intent here, right, is we're trying to support a transition to all electric buildings, which can more easily be served by renewable energy sources. So a lot more to come on this as well. But again, the point I wanted to highlight is there's some real money that is on the table here to serve the projects. Next slide, please. Okay, the tax credits. Dr. Regley gave an excellent example of kind of the opportunity that is on the table with some of these tax credits. So the first one on this list here is the one that he highlighted. So the Section 48 tax credits is designed to support clean energy technologies. And as he said, it's kind of a 30% tax credit baseline with a series of adders. This map illustrates the energy communities that he noted. So, if you're doing a project that is in the pretty colors on this map, it could be eligible for an additional adder to the ITC, the investment tax credit. Also wanted to flag Section 30C. This is a tax credit for electric vehicle charges. And again, reiterate, Dr. Regley's message of one of the real innovations of the IRA is enabling a direct pay mechanism. So nonprofits and other organizations that may not have to pay tax credits or may not have to pay taxes can get a payment from the IRS equivalent to that tax credit. There's also ability to transfer the tax credit to another entity. Again, they're just trying to come up with additional ways to enable people to take advantage of the opportunity here. Next slide, please. Section 45L, this is a tax credit to support new construction and substantial rehab going for Energy Star ZERH, Zero Energy Ready Home certification. So think tax credit projects. And the 179D, a tax deduction, probably mostly going to be served in higher buildings where you got to do a model to demonstrate a certain level of energy savings beyond a baseline. I think I've got two more left. Okay, so on the programmatic side, the climate pollution reduction grants, this is a two-tiered initiative. So first up were the planning grants and then to come the implementation grants. The planning grants were awarded to the state as well as the large metropolitan areas in the state to do planning activities, come up with climate action plans. The initial climate action plans were submitted last month, and then work is going to continue for a little bit to develop a comprehensive climate action plan. The implementation grants, these are competitive grants, unlike the planning grants, and applications were submitted earlier this month by the entities that are listed on the slide here. Perhaps there were others, but these are the ones that I'm aware of. And the actions that are in those proposals are intended to address needs defined in the climate action plan. I'll note that at least the applications from Southwestern Pennsylvania and the Philly Energy Authority included a focus on affordable multifamily. So awards are expected there this summer. Last up, I want to highlight the community change grants. This is a really unique opportunity. This is funding coming through the EPA. They are looking for community-driven, cross-sectoral, collaborative initiatives to advance environmental justice and impact. The applicants need to have a strong focus on community-based leadership. And there are grants through 2 different tracks of $1 to $20 million. These are going to be very competitive. The applications are rolling. It's open now through November of this year. This sounds appealing. I do encourage people to start to look into it and talk to others quite soon, because it's going to be quite competitive. I know there are a number of grants already in development across the state. So that is it for me. I believe Keith is up next to dig into the rebates. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Pat. I do have one question from you from an attendee that I think we should answer quickly. You mentioned GRIP, the GRRP funding at the beginning of your section. Will they have another funding round in 2025, or is the 2024 the end of the program?
I don't know. I keep wondering the same thing. Keep looking at HUD's website, but what the information on that slide is what's on HUD's website right now. Good question.
Great, thank you. And I think that's going to be the answer for a lot of things, and we're all figuring this out together as a community. And so next up, and thanks, Pat, for that overview, to dig a little deeper into the homes program, which has some real promise for deep retrofits in multifamily, is Keith Welks, who is helping PHFA to design their homes, the home energy performance-based whole house rebates program. And while many programs offer a lot of opportunity for affordable housing, this is perhaps the most direct full cost program. And it's just been a pleasure to work with you, Keith, and thank you so much for being here, and take it away to give us some insight, deeper dive into this program.
Sure. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First, let me express my appreciation for Housing Alliance putting this together, for Liz and her work in hosting it, being the sort of maestro of the slides in the last 24 hours. I know all the speakers are very grateful for your help as well, Liz. As Liz said, I think we're going to have a bit of a change of pace here. The first several presentations that you've heard already, going all the way back to Dr. Regley's, we're at a pretty high level. We're going to change the level of magnification. I guess you might say we're going to go from a period where the discussion was a mile wide, and hopefully get to one that's now, I hope, a bit more than an inch deep. And as Liz said, I'm going to talk about one of the 2 IRA rebate programs that you just heard about. It's the Home Efficiency Rebates Program. In my experience, this program is already unique and already having had a legal name change within the first year of its existence. It used to be called the HOMES Program, a name that actually didn't quite reflect any acronym that DOE could ever come up with. They've now moved to something a little cleaner, Home Efficiency Rebates, or HER. Some really basic background to get us started. As you know, this program and the HERE program that was just discussed were created by the IRA in 2022. The program runs for 10 years through 2032. You heard that the 2 rebates that we're discussing are in total going to provide Pennsylvania with $260 million. It's split almost perfectly equally. I call it $130 million for each during the 10-year time period. Now, you might think that means that we're looking at $13 million a year. In fact, we're already looking at more than that, because by the time this program gets started, it will most likely be 2025 before any funding goes out the door. So we're looking at 7.5, 8 years program. So we're already up to more than $17 million a year just in the HER program for rebates. It could even be more than $17 million a year. One of the eccentricities about this program is that DOE has encouraged states to roll the money out as quickly as they can. So if Pennsylvania is successful in exceeding $17 million in placement in a year, it can immediately apply for funds from the next cycle. So if not literally, figuratively, the sky's the limit in terms of how much of this money we can access and how quickly. DEP, which is administering it initially, on behalf of the Commonwealth through its Energy Programs Office, is only too aware of this opportunity and is pushing as hard as it can to move quickly. The money in each of the 2 programs, the HERE program and the HOMES program, is segregated with up to 20% available for administrative and sort of support costs, but 80% must go to actual rebates. And finally, and just to be clear, this is a situation where we have 2 different programs, HERE and HOMES, and effectively are split over two kind of sectors: single family homes and multifamily homes. And each of those is eligible for funding in each of the two programs. So basically have, you know, a 2x2 or 4 kind of program grid to look at. As it may turn out, the multifamily sector, as we all know, is not it's not one complexion. There are projects with hundreds of units in them, and there are locations that have, you know, 5 or 10 or 15 or 20. So single family, multifamily with an asterisk. Next slide, please. So PHFA and DEP are incredibly interested in the opportunity set for the multifamily area. We know that multifamily provides an extraordinarily high percentage of the affordable housing stock in Pennsylvania. We also know that while there have been lots of programs historically dedicated to providing resources for LMI individuals in the housing space, most of them have been dedicated to single family. So there's enormous interest in taking advantage of the IRA HER rebates for multifamily purposes. And in fact, while you may know or you may hear that there's a relatively modest minimum amount of the money that must be dedicated to the affordable housing LMI sector, at least at this time, DEP and PHFA are looking to utilize virtually all of the HER money for multifamily deployments. So that's very exciting and reflects a degree of commitment and recognition that I know PHFA is incredibly thrilled to see. Just some of the details that are useful to know. Eligibility for a particular building to qualify for a HER rebate is determined at the building level. That is to say, sort of an aggregate picture of the building confers eligibility or makes it very difficult to move forward. And that sort of composite picture is at least 50% of the available units must be occupied by households with less than 80% of AMI. If you meet that, every unit in the building is eligible for rebates. PHFA already has an existing role or relationship with more than 2,000 multifamily affordable locations. So the sort of opportunity universe is enormous. All of those buildings or locations that are in the PHFA portfolios are what are called categorically eligible. That means the 50/80 requirement is largely automatically applied. That's a key factor here. It indicates that there will not need to be sort of manual determination or description of eligibility, but mere presence on the PHFA portfolio and compliance period time still available will qualify a building to at least seek a rebate. It is possible to demonstrate eligibility at the building level manually, that is to say, outside the PHFA categorical eligibility. We think that's going to be very difficult and time consuming. And frankly, it may represent sort of a bridge too far for a lot of multifamily developers or owners or operators. Interestingly enough, if you have a building that qualifies and meets the 50/80 rule, you can in fact secure rebates for improvements that are done at every unit, not just those that are occupied by LMI individuals. And already mentioned that we recognize that the multifamily sector is not monolithic, and we may have, you know, different colors for different kinds of multifamily settings. Next slide, please.
I do have a question, Keith, that I think is relevant here. There's a question from Shannon. Is multifamily including intergenerational housing or boarding homes as we're talking about multifamily considerations?
Again, I'd like to go with the already well-worn, I'm not sure response. I don't know that PHFA itself has buildings that fall into that category, either of those categories, although I'm happy to check that and get back to Shannon. If it doesn't, the first thing I would say is you'd be dealing with a manual eligibility determination, which will be challenging because of the level of information, privacy concerns, difficulty in getting the information, consent of tenants for that information to be deployed for any purposes, et cetera. So I don't want to be too pessimistic, but it may be a challenge.
Thanks,
But
Keith.
certainly
And
worth pursuing. And I'll try to remember to do that.
yeah, that's great. And I'll just note there is another multifamily efficiency programming that will be started through DCED's weatherization assistance program that maybe is less complicated than some of the complications you just mentioned for this one. But pass it back to you. Thanks.
Great. So let's move to the next slide, please. Some things that I know often come up, so to sort of address them really quickly, let me take the lower part of the slide first. Tenants will not be prejudiced in any way by IRA rebates. The IRA program itself imposes a number of constraints on landlords or owners to protect tenants from sort of negative consequences of their living conditions, the quality of life, and perhaps their operational budgets being improved. And I noted them there. I don't read them, but I will just also add that, again, the likelihood is that most of the properties that move through this program, at least in the opening years, will be PHFA related properties. They will already be subjected, the owners will be subjected to, and the tenants will be protected by a variety of sort of conventional, traditional tenant protection measures, including the ones you see here and various others. So I don't think there should be much cause for skepticism or anxiety that IRA projects might sort of rebound in a way that you didn't anticipate. Finally, I think it's worth noting that one of the challenges in implementing this program and persuading building owners and operators to participate is that interests may not necessarily always align in the way you think. In particular, the question of whether multi-metered buildings or master metered buildings will operate the same way, I think is an open one. I think that there are clear incentives for owners who have multi-metered buildings to go through this, obviously, but even in a master metered building, I think there are benefits that it will accrue to owners that will make it more likely that they will do it. The benefits will also accrue to owners for split metered buildings, although it's not as clear there, and I think there's some work to be done with messaging. Next slide, please. All right, so here's the thumbnail, because you don't really know what we're talking about yet. The HER award rebates are substantial, and they're obviously designed to encourage energy efficiency measures or retrofits in residential units, often called sort of preservation activity. The two programs are not all that close. They're not siblings at all, as you see my sort of characteristically lame attempt at humor. They're more like second cousins or even less close proximity. I say that because they really work very, very differently. Get through this really quickly, but the HERE program is really your traditional single appliance electrification program. It's sort of a go to your Home Depot and pick up a unit, have a contractor install it, you install it as a DIY, and get a rebate check back. The HER program is not that. It is based on the development of sort of very sophisticated assessments of present energy usage and the sort of energy environment in a building, and then a diagnosis and set of recommendations for a series of measures, ECMs are often called, that are designed to work together to sort of synergistically produce greater benefits from the whole than the individuals would contribute if they were just pursued alone. And I sort of think of the first program here, which is by name an electrification program, as really sort of a participation award. If you put the appliance in, you get the benefit. This program, the HER program, is a lot more rigorous than that. Just doing the work doesn't necessarily get you the benefit. There are two ways to demonstrate that you are entitled to the benefit. I'll go through them very quickly. The methodologies are the measured one and the modeled one, excuse me. The measured one is exactly as it sounds. It involves taking a complex history of of a particular building's usage, and then beating that, improving upon that with the work you do. And if you don't improve upon it, you don't get a rebate. The modeled method requires use of certain BPI and other formulas and standards to do, again, rigorous calculations as to how much energy savings should be realized. And once the modeling is approved, the rebates are essentially guaranteed, if you will, so long as there's a certification that the work was actually done. So it pushes it into more like the single appliance, except for this incredibly heavy overlay of rigor in terms of modeling out what's expected to occur. Let's go to the next slide, please, because I know we're going to run short on time. So this is what I was talking about. I will really try to summarize this slide to a great degree. The BPI standards are listed there. Programs must employ QA/QC measures to document that, and particularly in modeled instances, that the modeling is producing projects that actually deliver the results that are expected. I would note that the advantages and disadvantages of the two methods are pretty distinct. From our perspective, at this point, the inclination is for the program to move forward with modeling receiving heavy emphasis. It is a much safer approach. It will get more money out the door much more quickly, and it will actually keep program costs down and costs to participants down in a way that the measured approach will not. Obviously, we can talk about this more in the breakout room. Next slide, please. We've already seen a slide that talked about this. In the interest of time, I'll just note that the rebates are significant. And the important point here is that the level of rebate that you receive is commensurate to a large extent to the degree of savings you deliver. All right. You have to reach a certain threshold or you get nothing. If you achieve that threshold but don't get to the highest level, you get the first level of funding you see there, that sort of third bullet. If you get above 35% in your project, you can get up to 80% of cost and up to $8,000 per residential unit. Important footnote, and Dr. Regley mentioned this, we can talk about it a lot more. It's clear that no matter how generous these rebates are, they're not 100% of the project. And so that means there will be a gap, and that gap will need to be made up by some source of funding. And that's a critical part of the role that PHFA anticipates playing. That's one of its strengths, one of the reasons that PHFA and DEP have partnered together to try and sort of architect a program that addresses as many obstacles that might prevent this program from being successful as we can. I think next and last slide. We did want big smiles from Liz. The words last slides, big smiles. So I do want to say that DEP and PHFA have been working closely together for the better part of a year now. It's been a very intensive process with meetings and discussions several times a week. We've already utilized one consultant for some landscape delivery, decoding the IRA, helping us keep track of DOE guidance documents. We are pretty far along in charting out a set of roles and relationships and are already working on an interagency agreement. Over the next several months, we expect that an RFP for the HER program will be released. Let me just drop a footnote. Our RFP for the HERE program has already been released. It's been out for about a week and a half now. And DEP is moving forward with that program. Again, it's a simpler program to arrange, and therefore, I think quite properly the first one to get out the door. But we hope to sort of catch up in the next couple of months. And lastly, and perhaps of significant interest, is that community engagement is a big part of what we're doing. We've already had more than a dozen meetings with stakeholders and potentially interested participants, and we'll have many more. In fact, I think at this point, we're considering trying to have one even as the RFP is being finalized so that folks in this sector will understand exactly how we're approaching this, what our sort of process roadmap looks like, and know what to expect. Let me wrap up there. I think I ran over by a minute or two. My apologies. I hope this was helpful.
Thank you so much, Keith. And I think that last point at the end is so important. And that's that, I think you've been wonderful in making sure that there's going to be inroads built. I think you and I had a conversation a few weeks ago where you said, we're not going to build something that no one wants to use. And what that requires is that everybody in this community share what it is that you need. And so I'm going to pass it to Sarah in a moment, but I want to give one more plug again that Housing Alliance is collecting through a survey your input into what your needs are in the community, what your interest is in engaging. The deadline is Monday, April 15th. So I encourage you all to take some time to take that survey so that we can have your feedback on this directly. And it can speak into both what your technical assistance needs are, but also how these programs get designed because, again, it takes all of us. So pass it to my colleague Sarah Rolich at Action Housing, who has deep experience in kind of getting ready for accessing efficiency programs. And if your head is spinning from words like modeled and measured, Sarah can probably put some spin on it so you can start to identify what steps you need to take in order to move forward. So Sarah, tell us about the how.
Thanks, Liz, and thank you, Keith, for walking through the programs. Learning more and more every day, which is exciting. So good afternoon. My name is Sarah Rolich. I manage the energy and construction aspects here at Action Housing. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Action Housing is approaching, quote, getting ready for the IRA, how we are getting our data in line to be ready for these programs. So next slide, please. So Action Housing is a nonprofit housing developer, owner, and manager in Western Pennsylvania, based in Pittsburgh. We are also Pennsylvania's largest weatherization provider. We also run the whole home repair program in Southwestern Pennsylvania. We have been working with other IRA programs focused on single-family solar and decarbonization as well. I'm hoping to run some of those programs in-house with our whole home repair program infrastructure. But what I am most excited about as the energy manager at Action is the programs focused on affordable multifamily housing, which is what we're talking about today. So next slide, please. I'm going to give a quick summary of our energy efficient history and kind of what we've been focusing on here in Pittsburgh. This is Uptown Lofts, which is a passive house, new construction, affordable multifamily housing building. We primarily focus on 9% LIHTC for our new construction projects, but our portfolio is full of older HUD 202s, 811s, and project-based Section 8 properties. Next slide, please. We also do historic renovations to energy efficiency, to bring out more energy efficiency to existing buildings. So this is the historic YMCA in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, which was renovated to passive house standards, and it uses the geothermal wells to supplement the HVAC equipment. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about the needs. So I'm not going to go too much into this, but from an owner operator's view, the need is great, and deferred maintenance is a huge issue for us, and I suspect others on this call. And we're in the process of planning to address that, and we hope that these IRA funds are able to help us preserve our portfolio of affordable multifamily housing and across the state and country. Next slide, please. So the first step that we've taken is to analyze our portfolio and to collect the data. So data is, the foundation of measuring and advancing building performance. So we're working on benchmarking / baselining, which is basically gathering a full year of data to kind of see where your properties are now, because it's crucial to know where you are to know where you can be. We're also doing pretty in-depth asset management inspections, so we understand failing equipment, other non-energy related things that our buildings need now or are going to need in the next 5 to 10 years, so we can plan for that, and we know what buildings need investments. We can use that in our kind of algorithm for choosing buildings to participate in these programs. Interviews with property management, that's kind of the same thing. tenants and property managers know the complaints that they get and the issues that these buildings are seeing. And then we're also, partnering with our real estate development team, planning for refinances and new construction to see how we can kind of pair these programs with that. Next slide, please. So baselining data scraping. So there are a few ways to go about benchmarking or baselining. One method is called data scraping, which is when you create an online utility account and then you kind of pair it with a program that does the data collection. So Energy Star Portfolio Manager is a popular one. That's the one that we use. And it kind of pulls the data from your utility website into Energy Star, and it will give you your total energy usage. So we like to use that. We also, most of our new construction buildings are Energy Star certified. So we use that to report our data for that program through the PHFA program. Next slide, please. We also use just old-fashioned Excel spreadsheets because some utility companies don't talk to the online data scrapers. So we manually enter them with bills. There's more staff time, but it's just as accurate. You're getting the data into an analysis tool. Next slide, please. So the reason why we want to collect a full year of data for all of our buildings is we're really looking to calculate our site EUI, which is the energy use intensity. So it's basically the total energy usage divided by the square foot of the building. So that so it really is, it enables you to compare your portfolio by square footage, because obviously a 100-unit building is going to use more energy than a 20-unit building, but we really want to understand how they compare, portfolio, so we can target buildings with a higher energy usage per square foot. And this is just an example of a calculation where I calculated the electric usage, the gas usage, converted it to kBTU, which is a common method of comparing electric and gas data, and then I'm dividing it by the square footage to come up with the EUI. So next slide, please. So benchmarking and the importance of whole building data and why it's challenging. So we want to get the whole picture of the buildings, the whole energy usage, which if it's individually metered, which most buildings are, that's including the tenant data as well. So that's challenging because it's hard to get access to the tenant bills. I mean, we work with our friends at DOK and Light here in Western Pennsylvania. They have a data aggregation tool, which we helped design, and we helped bring it to existence because it made it impossible to do this work without it. So they're basically they pull all the data together for you, and they give it to you as one lump sum, so there isn't any privacy concerns. You don't see any tenants individual usage. So that's a great tool to get full building data. Challenges I often face with that is sometimes utility websites malfunction, sometimes they change. Gaining access to those accounts, even if they're house accounts. Sometimes a property manager who worked here 10 years ago created an account and now I don't have access to it. So it's working with the utility to get access to all those accounts. And then the tenant paid gas meters as well is often a challenge to get. I have to work with our property management team to work with tenants to get that, and signing releases and things like that. So those are kind of the reason why we need whole building data and kind of the challenges that I've faced over the years. Next slide, please. So I wanted to bring this to everyone's attention. This is SAFE, which is a nonprofit. They created a carbon roadmap tool. Basically compares your portfolio baseline carbon emissions, and it helps you plan for the future. We are here at Action, we are in the very early stages of using this tool, so I can't speak to the outcomes yet, but we are in the data entry portion and hope to use it for more future planning. I wanted to flag it so folks can look it up. It's a download Excel spreadsheet, pretty easy to use, and it's free. Next slide, please. So basically right now, since the IRA programs, the only up and running IRA program right now is the HUD GRRP program, which you heard my colleagues speak about. We've been focusing on that because that's the one that's up and running right now. So after doing my benchmarking, and my interviews and the asset management reviews and everything, we identified Crafton Towers, which is a 103 unit apartment building in Crafton, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Pittsburgh. It has the second highest EUI of our portfolio, but it has the most need for on a deferred maintenance perspective. And we identified capital needs, plumbing and HVAC issues to make this building a good target for some investment. So the program is designed to be a very heavy lift. The HUD program is designed to be a very heavy lift that typically requires a full retrofit and a recapitalization. So we were only able to truly handle one of these projects at a time. And unfortunately, with the very, very tight timeline of these programs, we're focusing on this one property to do this. So we hired an energy engineer to do a energy model, and we did the MBEST tool, which is basically a spreadsheet that HUD created to evaluate the building as it is today, energy model, and I'm working on the GRRP application now. And I met the contractor to get some preliminary pricing, because pricing is a big part of this in the application. You have to prove that the application can meet the requirements, and you have to prove that it's a feasible project. So that's what I'm working on, pulling all that data together now to hopefully have the application in the next couple weeks. So, TBD on whether or not this project can move forward, but we're excited about it. And we're also excited for the PHFA programs that are coming down the line, to see if we can get some dollars and upgrade some more of our properties. So that's all I have for today. Thank you.